Everyone's watching stocks, but the real story this week is that markets tried to rotate to risk right as tariffs came back into the frame. Over the next few minutes, we'll show you what the Supreme Court ruling changed, why the new tariff threat matters more than people think, and the exact levels that decide if this rotation survives next week or not. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Markets and into our end of week session. And a lovely piece of news to end off our week. Basically, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump's tariffs were not legitimate. They strike them down, and Trump vows to resurrect them again using other means. So, what basically happened? Well, out of 6-3, the court ruled Supreme Court judges basically said that 6 out of 3 people, so altogether 6 out of the 9 that were there, basically said that, hey, what he did was illegal. He wasn't within his jurisdiction to do so, and therefore he cannot proceed ahead with it. Now, there's going to be way more future litigation processes as to what happens with the money that they earn from the tariffs and whether that goes back to the countries or not. But right now, it's been deemed illegal. And of course, Trump after that said, actually, I'll find another way to put tariffs on. And using other means of basically litigation and laws, he's basically initially said that he would do 10% of global tariffs across the world to basically show his power. But then later on, through other pieces of news events, he actually changed that to 15%. So now we are going on to a 15% of tariffs. Now, initially speaking, they will have a 150-day limit to these particular tariffs. Whether they can be re-put ahead or not, that's going to be very interestingly seen over the next couple of like after the 150 days or whatnot, and that's more to come. But for now, he's definitely showing off his power and what he can do, and he's definitely wanting to strong arm the benefits that would have for the US. Obviously, we have over here France biting back and saying the EU has tools to hit back, and we're just basically coming for a global tariff war over here. I mean, at least that's the precedent that's being set over here. Whether that goes ahead or not, that's a very interesting aspect. But right now, it's definitely a bit of a threat. So we're just going to have to watch out for that over the next couple of weeks over that looming threat and what that does to the markets. But all in all, for now, in terms of the US strength, it's actually looking good. Like, I think this, even though the court ruled, against Trump's favor and Trump's still willing to hold his tariff, altogether in terms of the US dollar strength, it's still in a bit of a short uptrend on the daily. So we're definitely seeing some particular strength over here relative to that. And a particular ticker that me and Steve have been following throughout this particular channel is particularly the Russell. The Russell is small cap businesses, 2,000 of them, where we track how their growth is growing. And basically, so they're still also holding strong as well. And over in this reasonable, I would call it long-term daily uptrend. So that's actually holding up pretty well as well when we go into the markets. How we proceed ahead is actually a very interesting story. I think another piece of information that when it comes to charts is when we look, okay, cool. And when we talk about rotation in this video and the markets being a little bit more risk on, well, my thesis is that gold and silver basically had their moves. They have, strengthily going up. Now, in this particular case, in the short term, it is making a bit of a higher high over here. Whether that sticks or whether that not, we'll see that throughout the next of the week. But basically, gold and silver have definitely shown a little bit of strength. In the past cycles, once they've shown their strengths and set their movements, this generally sets up a little bit of a move for risk assets. Okay. And like I showed you with the Russell showing its move of consistently moving up with the dollar strength. And whatever these tariff news are, or whatever the news events that come out over the next couple of weeks, could it be setting us up for a better risk environment? I'm definitely hopeful for, but I think there's some data points over here that might actually prove why that may be the case as well. Because when we talk about risk, I think in terms of forward leaning and technology, one aspect that I love is crypto and Bitcoin. Bitcoin over here, if you see, is in a bit of a range. It's low at 62K and it's high at above 70K. And right now it's ranging a bit sideways. Now, me and Steve were having this particular discussion very recently, but we can see over here that currently it's ranging sideways on the MACD. It's just flipped a little bit of a bullish crossover. Another very interesting fact is recently, when we look at the price points of Bitcoin and the most amount of Bitcoin traded within certain price points, this line of about 67K this line of about 67K is one of the most transacted Bitcoin price that has ever occurred. So just 3 weeks ago, this was at about 241K, which would have made the chart over here. Now we've gone way past to about 618,000 Bitcoin being transacted in this area, setting an all-time high, which basically means that buyers are stepping up in the market and have bought the most amount of Bitcoin at the range of 67,000 than any other price point considerately. So something has happened over the last 3 weeks, which has got some amount of confidence in the market to be like, hey, we want to look into supporting this risk asset. And Steve might support this a little bit later with his volume profiles or relevantly so. But personally speaking, it makes me a little bit more risk on. And when we talk about risk on throughout this particular channel, we've talked a lot about ETH BTC strength because this is ETH strength against Bitcoin. And we can see over here that ETH BTC has generally been on this downtrend until very recently, where it's started to stabilize a little bit and go a bit sideways, maybe setting a bit of a higher low over here. The other interesting thing that me and Steve were just talking about is the RSI divergence, because RSI is making higher highs over here. And then over here, you've got the price going a little bit lower over here, which basically means the strength in the market is slowly moving upwards. And whenever there's an RSI diversion, that generally can indicate a bit of a change in trend reasonably immediately or reasonably strong. So how that plays out over the next couple of weeks, I'm actually a little bit hopeful that it's in the benefit of risk, but definitely some good signals over here for us to look at today. On that, I will pass it over to Steve.
Well, that was really comprehensive, Yash. I think I'll go home. You that's really amazing. So that's been an absolutely fantastic summary of everything overall. And no, well done, mate. Well done indeed. I'll start sharing my screen, and I think because you've actually really topped it off in terms of Bitcoin overall, let's start having a look at that. I've just shared the screen firstly there, and I'm just enlarging the Bitcoin chart firstly. Now, going off on that particular chart that you just referred to, the interesting part about that being that 67,000 key level area does align fairly well from a couple of perspectives that I can see. Firstly, a support level from Thursday. This is really, really interesting and really, really key. This blue line here is, as you can see from this number here, 66,000. It bounced off that level on Thursday. The open of that particular candle, which you can see from this number up here, the open of that candle is 66,400. All around about that 67,000 mark. What's really fascinating is where it's bouncing at this point in time. Now, Bitcoin right now is just under 68,000. But this particular support level here being the next blue line, just underneath the 68,000 point where Bitcoin is right now, is this figure here, 67,500, which is really very much aligned to exactly that point where you were talking about on that chart. There is another indication which could be of really high value here as well, and that is the volume profile that you're actually referring to. Now, this is something that a lot of people actually do refer to as well, in relation to particular areas of interest that may actually occur with specific volume nodes and volume areas where Bitcoin or any other instrument gets traded as well. And you'll actually notice that there are these red lines here, which are points of control that happen on a weekly basis. Because we're looking at the 30 minute chart overall there, and these get calculated over a weekly basis for each one of these in terms of these points of control. Now, this point of control here is aligned at 67,100 over the past week. The week prior, 68,900, they can act as support and resistance as well. But it's fascinating to see that over the past week in particular, 67,100 has appeared as that particular point of control there.
Mm,
So they're all seeming to align around about this 66, 67, 68 kind of area, which does align very nicely with what you were presenting in that chart before. But let's now go back. There's a lot of lines on those. And I'll go back and just enlarge that chart overall here again. But you can really see that, and we're just going to get rid of those bottom indicators there to really see we can line up here. The Ichimoku lagging indicator is now going above those support levels as well too. So we're starting to get a bit more of a bullish case in relation to Bitcoin overall. Ethereum, as we've been discussing previously, the big area of interest has been that 2,101 level that we were discussing over the past week or so. It's still sandwiched pretty much right in between all of those areas. So it's pretty much indecisive at this point in time. The biggest thing about all of these, as you can really see, are the moving averages. We're still underneath a lot of these declining moving averages, which is really, really much of a bummer when it comes to a lot of these cryptocurrencies. But like we were also saying over the last week, or even over the midweek, we are getting some exceptions. Bitcoin Cash in particular was one of them. It's starting to break outwards and getting up towards the VWAP, being that green line there.
mm,
Things are moving. Polygon was another one we did mention. It's actually got up and above its recent short-term moving averages, but it's starting to retrace back towards them as we speak. So we're getting some movement. Some of them are making their movements forward, like Bitcoin Cash, for instance, but others are starting to pull backwards. So there's still a lot of indecision going on. They need some direction. They need some movement. They need something to actually point them in the right direction in terms of the way to go. Still a lot of dynamics going on in terms of trying to figure out exactly what's happening. We'll wait and see.
great.
Gold and silver, like you were referring to, they have made their swing upwards on the dailies. Okay, we were talking about downward swings, but what's actually
Mm,
happened is they've actually bounced off. In the case of gold, bounced off that VWAP, going upwards. Okay, you can also see on top of that as well, moving averages have moved upwards, both for gold futures as well as the gold ETF.
mm,
Very positive in terms of the gold aspect there. Silver ETF, or sorry, silver futures, I should say, firstly, has also bounced upwards in relation to short-term moving averages. In terms of silver ETF, same thing, bouncing off the 50-day moving average as well. So there's some strength there. However, both the silver futures and the silver trust are still trading below the VWAP. So we've still got relative weakness for silver compared to gold. Something to
mm,
definitely keep in mind. The sellers are still in control in relation to silver. In gold, the buyers are in control. So there's still a difference there in relation to those. DXY you touched on before as well. DXY overall, you mentioned it very, very correctly. You've done a great job there in terms of summarizing that. In terms of the short-term moving averages moving upwards quite
mhm,
nicely. We were talking about that midweek of the week that's just gone by in terms of actually developing some strength there with the short-term moving averages. But take a look at this now. We've got the 50-day moving average that's bumping its head on.
mm.
Could all of a sudden see some form of resistance coming up against this here, and especially as it's now actually hitting towards this particular point here as well. So there's a lot of potential resistance that it could actually come against there.
I
Indice,
agree.
indice wise, okay, yeah. Indices are really, really fascinating because what's happened with all of the major indices is they've bounced off recent long-term moving averages. Each and every one of them. Not too sure whether people have realized that or not. Why is that
Mm,
important? This is forming structure. On top of that as well, short-term moving averages have all turned upwards as well on these here. However, there are some distinct differences. The Dow looking pretty decent. Russell looking pretty decent as well. But we've been saying that all along, haven't we, mate?
mm,
Okay. Now,
yeah.
that's something there. Now, with the Russell, we've also been talking about TLT in terms of the bonds. Bonds, we were up at this point here at the end of last week in terms of Friday. What we were saying about bonds, there might be a pullback. Sure enough, it happened, came back down to the 100-day moving average. And what it's done since then, it's bounced off that 100-day moving average. How clean. Look at that. Beautiful, clean bounce right off that. Tested it, kissed it literally, and then went bounce right back off it. Okay? So that's basically what's happened there. And literally, the close at the end of the trading week for the bonds is pretty much the same as where it was at the end of last week. Okay, so that's what happened with the bonds. But that's not the important part. When we really take a look at things overall, we want to look at the SPY, the broad market, that bounced off the 100-day moving average. But the Qs, that bounced off the 150-day moving average, being that orange line. But look where it's still stuck in between the long-term moving average, the short-term moving averages, but still stuck under the VWAP, being that green line. So relative weakness in terms of the tech sector is still there. Now this, why is that important? You might be saying. Aha, what's coming up this week in terms of major earnings?
Is it NVIDIA?
You got it.
Ah,
Okay.
yes.
Exactly. So in terms of the beginning of this week, we could have very, very quiet, constrained trade going on for the
Mm,
beginning of this week because everyone might be sitting on their hands waiting for something to go on until NVIDIA comes out with their earnings. Then after that, we might get the sparks flying. It could happen one way or the other. Watch to see whether these levels hold or whether these levels break.
mm,
That will most likely be the scenario overall. And really, there's not much else we can really say until that pretty much happens, and that's about midweek.
mm,
But really, in terms of the grand scheme of things, what do we basically do at this point in time in terms of all of our investors that we normally talk about each and every week, in terms of our conservative investors, our aggressive investors, and our long-term investors? They're probably all going to be waiting and watching to see what the big wig says. Okay?
mm.
Do they meet their expectations? But most importantly, how does the market react to those expectations?
And that's NVIDIA.
Exactly. Because as we all know, they could report the best bumper earnings that can ever happen in life, and then all of a sudden they could still fall. Or
Mm.
they could report the worst earnings ever, and they can still rise. It's basically a coin flip. So it's essentially how the market reacts to the earnings. That's the most important thing, because sometimes the earnings confuse people as to what exactly happens. And with that, mate, I'm going to pass it right back to you.
This week was actually so interesting. The first real attempt at rotation, but it only survives if price confirms and tariffs don't escalate again. We've been taking on this particular channel for a few weeks now, and honestly, we've had a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
So we would love it if you engage with us. Comment what is it that you would want to see us do differently? Is there something that you would want us to cover? Is there something that you believe that we could do better or do differently? Or is it something that you like that we do different to other channels? All in all, we love your engagement and the time that you spend with us on our channel. Thank you for joining us today. Not financial advice, just how we think about the
Thanks
markets.
heaps, guys.